We are live. Hello, young children. How are you? This is Phil, and we are going to finish chapter 6 in class. On Thursday, we did lesson 1 of chapter 6. And just a quick review, what is the difference between an authorization bill and an appropriation bill? Well, authorization tells me what program is going to be created and how much you can spend on the program. Remember, Congress deals a lot with money, with the budget. Appropriation is a law that's proposed to authorize money. Okay, so I want to make a law that now is going to say, hey, you can spend the money on this. There's a little bit of this going on now in the United States because of the coronavirus and the stimulus check that will be sent to American citizens. Remember, Congress has legislative powers. That is, they have the power to write laws, but they also have non legislative powers. Those are the powers to impeach the president or other um, politicians, other government agents. They can also regulate commerce. They can also uh, approve or disapprove of a nomination that the president has for an office, like the Secretary of Education, Secretary of Health, etc., etc. The legislative power of Congress are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And here again, it tells me what are the legislative powers. They can tax and spend, borrow to pay for government costs, to coin money and regulate its value, regulate foreign and interstate commerce, approve treaties, declare war, create and maintain an army, to make rules governing land and naval forces. But the non legislative powers is that they can count the electoral votes for a new president. They can remove a federal official from office by impeachment. They can confirm presidential appointments. They can ratify formal treaties with other nations and propose amendments to the Constitution. So, guys, that is basically what we looked at last week. But now we are going to move into lesson 2, and it's short, thank goodness, okay? And we're talking about how does the separation of powers influence the work of Congress. And this is just a little page to, if you want to read it later, just as a warm up, but we're going to jump right into it. I have a few notes here, if you can hear me turning the page, because it's not a lot of stuff, okay? Well, one thing that Congress has the power to do is investigate congressional witnesses, okay? Congress acts like a policeman of the government. So if it thinks that a government agency is not operating correctly, it will conduct an investigation. It can take days or months. Committee staffers travel the country, they collect evidence, they schedule witnesses. It's just like a court, except that it's not. It's not a legal court, okay? When they find the results of their investigation, what usually happens is they're going to create new legislation so that this doesn't happen again. Okay? One example of this is the Dodd-Frank bill that happened after the housing crisis in America. And they saw that, hey, the banks weren't treating people correctly. So we're going to create some laws that are going to reform banking. So that's what a congressional investigation does. Okay, that's what basically these paragraphs are talking about. They're going to give you some examples, like the Dodd-Frank bill is an example, but that's what it is. Okay. And it says at the end of the investigation, they concluded that the banks had misled the clients. Okay, they had lied to the clients. So they created some laws that lead to reform in government programs. Officials can be fired or new laws to deal with programs. Or sometimes they can damage the reputation of innocent people. But remember, these are not trials. This is not like going to court, but it operates a lot like a court. One example is that Congress has the power to subpoena witnesses. To subpoena is to legally call you to court. You have to go, okay? Um, they can also produce requested documents. That person needs to show me your tax bills, show me your WhatsApp conversations. Congress has this power. Also, if you are testifying in Congress, there's the possibility that you can perjure yourself, and this is not good. Perjure is when you lie under oath. Under oath is when you raise your hand and say, I swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. Don't do this if you're witnessing, if you're acting as a witness in Congress. This is bad. And then, yes, you can go to jail, and then you will go to a court which will judge you um, for that crime. Same thing with contempt. Contempt is if you are not cooperating. If they ask you to go there and talk, you have to go, okay? So, yes, for these things, you can be arrested and jailed. And again, this is not in the Constitution, but the courts usually uphold these abilities that Congress has. For a long time, Congress had a lot of power, okay? And it was almost like a kangaroo court where they just made up their own rules. But later, 1957 to be exact, there was a case brought to the Supreme Court where the Supreme Court said no. If you are in Congress testifying, you need to have the same constitutional rights that anybody else has, including the right not to incriminate yourself, which is the Fifth Amendment. How does Congress move around this? They tell you you have immunity. Immunity means if you tell me something that's a crime, you're not going to go to jail. So now you have to talk. And then if you don't talk, they say you are in contempt of court or of Congress, sorry, and then you have to go to jail. Okay, so that's their way of making people talk. Um, but it's important that Congress has this power because if Congress has the power to investigate, they have the power to regulate and create new laws and make sure that the government is working properly. Like I said, we're moving fast, guys. If you have any questions, you know my WhatsApp, message me. But look at that, we're already on page 5. And now we're talking about how does Congress oversee the executive branch? Because Congress and the president need to work together. And how does checks and balances work here? Okay, how does it work? Well, Congress has the legislative oversight. What this means is that if they believe that the executive branch is doing something that is not constitutional, they can either prosecute or take that law away. They can do something that says stop. Okay? And it's a way that checks and balances work. I always give you guys the example of Donald Trump when he made this law or he tried to pass an executive order saying, hey, no people can come to America from Muslim countries. And then the Congress said this is unconstitutional. They took it to the judges, judges agreed, boom, that executive order died. Okay? Problem is that it's very difficult to do this because Congress, I mean, it's big, 435 members, but there's many laws. Okay, so it's difficult for them to know what is going on in every part of the executive branch. Remember that the executive is not just the president; it's everything down to police officers, people that execute the law. Also, lawmakers know that oversight does not interest many voters unless it covers a major scandal or major problem. People don't care that they're watching, right? And also, some legislation is a little vague. So you don't know exactly what it means. What does this mean? So it's difficult to do this oversight all the time, but the legislative branch is working to do this, okay? And one other problem is that these committees can sometimes become friends with the federal agencies that they're supposed to look, okay, after. And this can create a environment of non-objectivity. They're not objective, and they can have a little bit of bias. So this is not good. So legislative oversight is related to rule of law because it helps to ensure that the executive branch is following the law. It's related to accountability and transparency, making people aware of what the executive is doing and holding executive officials responsible for their actions. It helps control the abuse of power by dividing power between the executive and legislative branch. How does Congress limit the executive? Because here we saw how it oversees the executive, but now how does it limit? Well, the executive needs to report to Congress. That's one. Okay. Every year there's a State of the Union where the president talks to the Congress. He lets Congress know this is what's happening, okay, in the country. These reports deal a lot with the budgets, a lot, but also new laws that the president may want and things like that. But the executive must report to Congress on the nation, especially the economy. Also, there's agencies like the GAO, which we talked about in chapter 5, okay? They study what is happening in the executive. They see that the money that the executive said it's going to spend on something is actually being spent on something. So GAO also checks finances. And obviously, Congress reviews budgets. That's their job, okay? To review the budget, make sure that money is being spent correctly. Why so much focus on money? Well, remember, during the Revolutionary War, the English were taxing everything, and they were just using their power to create money and to rule the economy in a negative way. So the founding fathers really wanted to make sure that the US government wouldn't do the same. Good question today is if the current governments are failing or succeeding in this. And also, there's independent counsel, means that it's almost like an attorney within the government that can investigate all the top officials, but he's independent. Okay, it would be like somebody that's not from Agostiniano going to Agostiniano to check if all the teachers are working correctly, if Padre if the new priest, I forgot his name, I'm sorry, is working correctly. It's somebody like this that has no bias. He doesn't care. It's some guy from China or something, okay? That's just going around and doing this. So, limits of power. It requires executive agencies to report back to Congress. Congress will ask one of its support agencies to study an executive agency's work, and it reviews budgets, and all the executive branch agencies may choose to expand or eliminate programs. Well, that's that. I hope there isn't. Okay, there isn't a lesson 4. Lesson 3, guys. Told you we're moving quickly with this one. But I hope not too fast. If you have questions, I am here for you. Okay? How does the separation of power influence the work of Congress? Okay, so there's a little warm up there, but we're going to skip that and go straight to the main idea. Tension is a fight. What creates a fight between Congress and the executive branch? Here's a little chart. Bills enacted by Congress and presidential vetoes. So you see here, and you get total numbers of bill enacted, total numbers of presidential vetoes. So look, there's the vetoes at the bottom, and look how many bills. It's a lot less and a lot less over the years. But a lot of this is because of the tension between the executive and legislative branch. But in a way, it's good. I mean, who needs more laws, right? So checks and balances, we should all know what that means, right? One branch of government checks the other, and we haven't even talked about the judicial branch yet. So we'll get to that. So one can veto the other, so laws don't pass, okay? Because the Congress can write a law, the president can veto or threaten to veto, okay? And then for Congress to override the president's veto, it needs a two-thirds majority, which is usually difficult to obtain. So this gives the president a really major role in legislation because he can kind of control what Congress does. Because he can say, okay, you want to write this bill? Guess what I'm going to do? And going to say no. And then it has to go back to Congress and they need to get two-thirds to override that veto. It's not an easy thing to do. But, you know, it's something that can create a deadlock. So some people don't like this because, especially imagine if the majority of the House of Representatives is Democrat and the president is a Republican. Not a lot of stuff happens, guys. Unfortunately, it was the same thing with President Obama. There were a lot more Republicans than Democrats, and guess what? Obama could do nothing. And now it's similar. Democrats in the House and Trump being a Republican, it kind of deadlocks. On one side, it's good because then, it's not just one side getting everything done. On the other side, it's bad because they're just kind of fighting with each other. And we're going to see that this is one other topic, the political fighting. But before that, we have different constituencies. The president is supposed to take care of America. The the representatives are more concerned with taking care of their region, their districts, their states. So they may work together with the president on some things, but they're more worried about getting reelected in their own constituents, in their own constituencies. So they may not fight as hard as the president may be fighting for a certain bill or vice versa. Party politics, it's just like Brazil, guys. It's PT or PSDB, and they can't work together. They're always fighting, and then nothing happens. In America, it's the same way. It's either you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, and you're always fighting, and nothing happens. So this division in government is really, really bad because each politician just focuses on what's going to make his party happy and not everybody happy. And it's gotten worse year by year. Okay, it's not getting any better. Organization is another thing that can create a bit of tension between the executive and legislative because the president may want action, but the Congress can move slow if it wants. Remember, there's those House committees where they can say yes or no on a bill. They can put the bill very late. They can schedule the bill to be debated in a year or 6 months. Uh, they can debate the bill forever if they want to. Like the Senate has no time limit for debate, so they can just debate the bill forever. So the actual organization of the Congress can make life very difficult for the president because the president may want something done fast and the Congress will make it move slow, which leads to the next topic, which is the president and the legislators are on different timetables. The president only has 2 terms, so a maximum of 8 years to do stuff. And he has to do a lot of stuff just in the first 3 years to get reelected to another 4 years. So um, they're busy. They want to move. They want to get things done. The senators don't, or and the representatives, because it's much easier for them to get reelected, and they can stay in power forever. A senator can be reelected until he dies or she dies. The same with the House of Representatives. So for them, 10 years is not a long time to fix a problem. For the president, it's an impossible amount of time because the president can't be president for 10 years. Okay. So because of this, the House and the executive branch don't always see eye to eye. Lyndon Johnson says you've got to give it all you can that first year. You've got just 1 year when they treat you right and before they start worrying about themselves. The third year, you lose votes. The fourth year, it's all politics. You can't put anything through when half of Congress is thinking about how to beat you. So you've got 1 year. So creates a lot of conflicts. Just to review here, party politics create conflicts between Congress and the president because often one party controls the White House and another controls the Senate or House or both. The election cycle also contributes to this type of conflict because presidents have about 3 years to develop and see their programs through Congress, and at best 8. Whereas senators and representatives are not limited to 2 terms in office and can afford to be more patient in handling controversial bills that do not affect their constituents directly. Balance of power. Very good Star Trek episode. What events and legislations have shifted the balance of power between Congress and the president? Well, what they're trying to talk about here, guys, is that sometimes Congress is more powerful, sometimes the president is more powerful. And basically, to begin, in the beginning of America, it was more Congress that made the laws. The president tried to be very small. The president tried to use very little power. Civil War is when we saw a change of this, so much that this is why we had the Civil War a little bit, because the South said, hey, I think the federal power is getting too strong. Abraham Lincoln used a lot of executive power during the Civil War. Andrew Johnson also used a lot of executive power, but slowly Congress became the center of power again. And this is probably why, if you remember from US history, I mean, we don't really talk about any of these presidents, right? There were a few that maybe you remember the name, like, Polk and Grant, Garfield. But for the most part, these presidents don't have this name that you remember because Congress was more in power until our favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt, right? US History 2. He was the first 2 lessons, I think, of US History 2. Why? Because he gave this new power to the president. He wanted to create bills, he wanted to create laws, he wanted, or to suggest them for people to write and create. So power shifted back to the president. Woodrow Wilson, too, okay, with his progressive plans. Uh, FDR with the New Deal, right? There was the Square Deal and then there was the New Deal. So power shifted to the president. Then it went back to Congress, especially in the 1970s with Nixon, because Congress felt that Nixon was way too powerful. And of course, um, he, he was almost impeached. He resigned. Sorry about that. Got a message here. So there's always this shift of power. Today, Congress grants the president a leadership role in proposing legislation. Okay. At the same time, members of Congress feel free to debate, modify, and pass or defeat anything a president proposes. So they try to have a little bit more of balance nowadays. Emergency powers. The Congress can give the president emergency powers if there's an emergency. And what is an emergency power? Martial law, mainly, but also power to control the economy, close the banks, control transportation and communication. Now, this is in case of war. Usually, in this paragraph here, it gives a few examples of uh, some emergency powers. By the way, this is page 6 of lesson 3. Roosevelt used it during World War II, and then later Truman during the Korean War, President Nixon during the Vietnam War. But the Congress felt that, hey, this is going too far, okay? And so they passed it, they passed an act to restrict the president's emergency powers. It's called the National Emergencies Act, which is right there. It established procedure for how and when a state of emergency exists. Under this act, the president needs to notify the Congress when they intend to declare a national emergency. The emergency cannot last for more than a year unless the president repeats the process. Okay, so the president needs to ask for these emergency powers. The Congress also has the power to balance the budget. Or, as you know, we've been talking about this a lot, that Congress deals with the American economy. So, how does it do this? Well, first, it's good to know that the president does have more responsibility now than before in planning the national budget, okay? But he has to send it to Congress to review. But because of the president's increased role, Congress passed the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act. One, what does it do? It provides financial expertise to Congress. Okay, it creates the Congressional Budget Office. Um, and this office is able to check to see if the money is being spent correctly, if there's enough money, if this is a good financial idea or bad. It establishes a permanent budget committee for each house. So, in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, there's a committee that again just checks the numbers, and it limits the ability for the president to impound funds. What does it mean to impound a fund? That's if the president refuses to spend money that Congress voted to fund a program. So, for example, if the Congress votes for some type of universal health care and they say this is going to cost $8 billion, the president can't say, I'm not going to spend that money because I don't like universal health care. No, he has to spend it, okay? The only way he can't do this is if, with another vote, both the president and the Congress agree to impound that money. So these are some things that the Congress can do. Congress has the power to budget and to tax. Okay, and it says the U.S. government stood on the edge of a so-called fiscal cliff at the end of 2012. eventually compromise between both political parties and the Senate and the House and the president led to the American Taxpayer Relief Act, which the president then signed into law. So the Congress is dealing with taxation, is dealing with the national budget. Oh, I don't have any more notes, guys. That means we reached the last page. So the last page talks about something called line item vetoes. And basically, what it is that the president, if he gets a bill, and if he can decide to veto parts of the bill and not the entire bill, so that uh, laws can be passed and things can move along. Okay. The problem is that this passed. Okay, the line item veto existed. The problem is that some argued that this is giving too much power to the executive branch to control the budget. Okay, because imagine I give I don't know, Gustavo, uh, 10 things to go to the store and buy for me, and I give him $100 to do this, or 100 reais. But then Gustavo decides, oh, I don't want to buy this, I don't want to buy this, and I don't want to buy this. And now I saved 30 reais, but maybe I'm going to spend this 30 reais to buy more of the other stuff. So that's kind of giving Gustavo too much power to control spending and to control the budget. And that's why the line item veto was deemed unconstitutional. And here you have something. The proposed line item veto would allow the president to cancel out some parts of a bill. Let me see if I'm showing this page or not. I don't think I am. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me see. Am I showing that page? No, I'm not. Let me share that with you. 1 second. Share. Let me share my screen. It's gonna look funky for a second. There it is. But now it looks good. Okay, so the proposed line item veto would allow the president to cancel out some parts of a bill while approving others. Supporters said that it would cut down wasteful federal spending, but opponents said that it would shift too much power from the legislative branch to the executive branch. So it was vetoed. But basically, it means what it says, guys. So if you come to a test question, it would be basically like that, Because imagine this: the president says, "Oh, I don't want to spend money on veterans benefits. I don't want to spend money on healthcare, but let's do tax reduction. Let's do military appropriation." Uh, Presidents have tried to get it back. Trump, as a matter of national security, I've signed the omnibus spending bill. I say to Congress, I will never sign another bill like this again. To prevent this omnibus situation from ever happening again, I'm calling on Congress to give me a line item veto for all government spending bills. So Trump kind of wants this. He says, give me the power to say no to some things and yes to other things. Governors, I think, have this power a little bit more, but the Supreme Court said it is unconstitutional. Okay, that's it, young ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, this would be a quick class, and it definitely was. I want to stop sharing. Okay. Good luck on your test on Friday, and adios, amigos.